to U.S. President Donald Trump's latest round of tariffs. While countries like Canada say they're working to negotiate better trade deals with the U.S. president, Trump is doubling down on the use of tariffs as a way to boost the U.S. economy.
You know, Prime Minister Carney is trying his best, but this guy will say something one day, and he'll wake up, and the cheese slips off the cracker, and then all of a sudden he goes the other way. And you're thinking, how do you deal with a guy like this?
It began like a power play. Trump-believed Canada would fold under pressure, the way smaller players often tend when the White House turns up the heat. First came the warnings, then thepablic jabs, and finally the threat that Canada's position on Palestinian state could freeze any trade deal in its tracks. Ottawa didn't flinch. Instead, it dug in, waiting for third moment to strike. That moment came when Mark Carney quietly turned the game around, leaving Trump on the defensive. The tariff stayed, the tension grew, ante-tables shifted. In the end, the Del thought he could slip it through his hands. Was this a trade standoff or something deeper? And what does it reveal about the real balance-off war between Washington and Ottawa? Let's dig in. Trump's threat came without warning. Hours before his self-imposed deadline for new tariffs against Canada, he reached for his full-right weapon. And after midnight social media post, it wasn't a statement from the Oval Office or a formal diplomatic message. It was a blunt shot fired into the public square, declaring that Canada's support for Palestinian state would make a trade deal very hard to reach. No back-channel talks, no quiet diplomacy, only a public attempt at humiliation. This was never a betrayed alone. Other allies had taken similar positions, yet none faced some retaliation. France, the UK, Mexico. Canada's offense was different. It wasn't policy disagreement that triggered Trump's anger. It was the display of independence. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada refused to shape foreign policy around American approval. That quiet defiance cracked Trump's image of control. And his response was to turn trade negotiations into a stage for personal revenge. Carney, however, did not bend. There were no phone calls seeking forgiveness, no public attempts to soothe the president's ego. Instead, Canada stood by its position, making decisions grounded in principle. Trump's frustration was plain. On camera, he accused Canada of treating American farmers very badly and repeated claims of massive tariffs, some over 200%. He spoke of protecting Canada with Oz military power, implying that such defense should grant him the right to dictate economic terms to him. Sovereignty was a commodity to be bought and sold. The facts told another story. Canada and the United States share one of the most balanced and deeply integrated trade relationships in the world. Tariffs are not arbitrary weapons, but negotiated under existing agreements. Trump's portrayal of Canada's an explorer ignored decades of mutual benefits. Attacks weren't about correcting trade imbalances, they were about manufacturing an enemy. And this time the villain he chose was a neighboring democracy bound to him by history, geography, and economic ties. Carney's refusal to flinch drew sharp contrast to Trump's approach. While Thea's president wielded fear and intimidation, Canada relied on steady policy and public reassurance. The message was simple. Sovereignty is not negotiable. Trump may have expected a rapid concession, but what he encountered was resistance built on confidence and preparation. The timing of his threats also collided with a weakening domestic picture. That week's job numbers came in below expectations, and a revision to previous months' era said nearly 260,000 jobs from official counts. Economists pointed directly to tariff uncertainty as the reason businesses were holding back on hiring. The president's trade war was cutting Ginto, his own economy rather. Then addressed the cause. He blamed statisticians' fourth data, accusing them of rigging the numbers. When a leader responds to evidence by attacking the messenger, it signals not strength, but instability. Canada, watching this unfold, saw it as an opportunity to reinforce its own path. While Trump used tariffs as a blunt instrument, Canada began investing in industries at home, steel, aluminum, and manufacturing, ensuring they were fueled by Canadian labor and resources. international interest in trade. With Canada grew with foreign governments and businesses eager to strengthen partnerships. Carney's vision was not about striking back at Trump, but about making Canada less vulnerable to American volatility. This approach endorsed a truth. Economic resiliency is built through independence. Canada was proving that it could expand its prosperity without waiting for Washington's moods to shift. Every time Carney rejected a bad deal, he reinforced the principle that Canada's agreements must respect its autonomy. The strategy wasn't loud or confrontational. It was deliberate, and it was working. Trump, in contrast, seemed driven less by policy than by control. He sought not mutual agreements, but arrangements that placed Canada in a subordinate role. It was Theism logic used in his business dealings. Power over partners, no partnership itself. Carney's unshaken stance turned that playbook useless. This standoff was also about endurance. Trump counted on fatigue, hoping Canada would tire of the constant threats and eventually concede. Carney counted on persistence, knowing that steady resolve could outlast unpredictable fury. As Canadian officials explained, sovereignty must be exercised to remain strong like muscle that weakens if wounded. By standing firm, Canada was notantly defending a single policy decision, but reinforcing the foundation of its independence. Even the trade landscape was not as vulnerable as Trump claimed. Thanks to the updated trade agreement, Canada had secured exemption shielding nearly 90% of its exports to the United States from blanket tariffs. These protections weren't accidental. They were the result of careful negotiation, including clear rules of origin and compliance measures. While Europe and Japan faced broader tariff exposure, Canada had already locked in safeguards. This meant that Trump's threats, while loud, carried far less practical impact. The U.S. could impose certain tariffs, but the bulk of Canadian exports were already insulated. The very architecture of the agreement Trump had touted contained provisions that weakened his own leverage. House advisors acknowledged the strength of these exemptions, even as he continued to portray Canada as vulnerable. Carney had turned the supposed weapon into something closer to a bluff. By focusing in preparation rather than provocation, Canada had ensured that even in the face of aggressive rhetoric, the damage would be minimal. Contrast between the toileters could not have been sharper. One relying on social media blasts and public ultimatums, the other on quiet strategy and long-term planning. As the days passed, the pressure campaign began look less like negotiation and more like theater. Trump's threats no longer rattled Ottawa, they had background noise. Canada's course while set toward building new alliances and strengthening internal capacity. The U.S. tried to destabilize. Canada's resolve became a demonstration of stability itself. In the end, Trump had set out to teach Canada a lesson about power. What had demonstrated instead was how little thought power could achieve against a prepared and determined partner. The midnight posts, the public accusations, the exaggerated claims of unfair treatment, all of it failed to deliver the submission he sought. Canada's trade defenses held, its economy kept building, and its leadership emerged from the confrontation with greater credibility on the world stage. Trump threatened Canada with economic fire, but forgot to check if they were already fireproof. Furthermore, President Trump has been very vocal about his disapproval of Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, a man he personally appointed during his first term. In recent months, that criticism has turned into open pressure, urging Powell to slash interest rates or step down entirely. The latest twist came with news that Federal Reserve Governor Adriana Cololo will be resigning, creating a vacancy that Trump could fill with someone aligned with his economist's instance and political goals. That vacancy could position him to install Powell's eventual replacement, handing the White House influence over an institution that was designed to remain independent of partisan control. With the headlines focus on trade disputes, this quiet maneuvering has even greater implications. Trump has already removed labor commissioners, reshaped regulatory boards, and targeted those proto-syngenic data he doesn't like. Now his reach is extending toward the Federal Reserve itself. This isn't about improving economic conditions. It's about controlling the scoreboard. Their risk extends far beyond the United States. If the Fed becomes an extension of political power, the ripple effects could destabilize markets around the globe. In Ottawa, the warning is clear. That's why Prime Minister Mark Carney's long-term push to diversify Canada's trading partnerships is more than patriotic posturing. It is an essential safeguard against volatility coming from South. Trump is reshaping the U.S. economy to serve his image. Carney is reinforcing Canada's economic foundations for the future. That contrast defines the current moment. The fragility of Trump's economic claims became visible when new employment data was released. Job numbers for May and June were revised sharply downward, erasing 258,000 positions from the official count. May saw only 19,000 jobs added. June just 14,000. Numbers that pale against the usual monthly range of 100,000 to 200,000. Markets reacted quickly, sliding throughout the day as investors absorbed the scale of thymices. And even Trump's own economic advisors admitted their policies. He disrupted markets and appended hiring. The president's tariff battles build a pathway to manufacturing revival have instead accelerated job losses at home. For Trump, this collapse isn't only economic, it's political. He believed he could force other nations into concessions while keeping the U.S. economy insulated from consequences. That illusion has now been stripped away by the data, removing the Bureau of Labor Statistics chief. Won't erase the reality. That the trade war is hurting the very workers it claimed to protect. When leaders retaliate against the truths instead of confronting the problem, it trivels panic, not strength. Canada, by contrast, didn't lash out at bad numbers or attempt to rewrite reality. Carney's approach was to accept the challenges, plan around them, and keep moving towards stability. The United States isolating leverage as its labor market wakens. Canada, protected by strategic agreements and diversified trade, is gaining it. This advantage becomes clear when comparing tariff impacts. Europe and Japan recently agreed to deals with the U.S. that carry a 15% blanket tariff on nearly all their exports. Canada's arrangement is very different, through exemptions secured under the updated customer agreement. Nearly 90% of Canadian exports to the U.S. foes no tariff at all, even under Trump's new threats. While the EU and Japan face a broad immediate tax on goods, Canada has an economic shield that covers most of its trade. This isn't the result of luck, it is the product of calculated negotiation. Carney didn't exchange sovereignty for leaf. He built protections into the framework itself, ensuring resilience no matter the political climate in Washington. The existence of this carvets explains why Trump's anger toward Canada has been more personal and less predictable than his disputes with her allies.